Human memory is selective, often discarding the details of our routine days. But specific catastrophes possess a magnitude that freezes time for anyone who hears of them. This is the mechanism of a flashbulb memory. When a tragedy is sufficiently sudden, the brain captures the surrounding environment with surprising clarity, the sounds, the smells, and the exact words on a radio broadcast, at the moment reality shatters. On October 19, 1988, India experienced this type of collective fracture. Indian Airlines Flight 113 went down on its approach to Ahmedabad. Decades later, survivors and witnesses still describe the news as Dil Dilane Wali, heart-wrenching. As the reports reached the public, a state of stunned silence followed. The phrase used most often in the regional accounts is "san re gaya," a literal paralysis of thought as the scale of the disaster became clear. Understanding the technical failure of Flight 113 requires looking first at the environment that preceded it. The disruption felt so massive because, until that morning, the flight was considered a routine part of the city's infrastructure. In the late 1980s, Ahmedabad was a primary hub for India's growing urban population. Air travel had become a standardized fixture of the morning skyline, with flights arriving and departing on strict, predictable schedules. The passengers on the flight from Bombay represented a cross-section of this growth. The manifest included business commuters and families returning home, all operating within the expectations of a typical Wednesday morning. For these travelers, aviation was a safe alternative to the congested ground transport of the era. The flight was viewed as a modern, reliable system that operated with a level of precision that passengers had come to trust implicitly. This atmosphere of routine and normalcy was the baseline for the morning. It ensured that neither the crew nor the passengers were braced for a deviation from their standard descent. At 6:20 a.m., Flight 113 began its transition from cruise altitude into its final approach. The crew prepared for a landing at Ahmedabad, where morning haze and industrial smog had reduced visibility at the airfield. As the pilots navigated through the haze, the aircraft began drifting away from the established glide path. The glide path is the specific angle and direction an aircraft must maintain to line up safely with the runway. On this map, we see the aircraft moving steadily off-center, away from its safe navigational beam. The crew was descending toward a critical altitude threshold. In aviation, if the pilots cannot visually identify the runway by a certain height, they must perform a go-around, applying full power to climb and attempt the landing again. By the time Flight 113 reached this height, it was already too far off course for a standard recovery. In the final seconds, the aircraft continued its descent without a distress call. The pilots were flying a controlled approach until the Boeing 737 struck a tree and an electrical pylon just 5 kilometers short of the runway. The investigation revealed a chain of events: a hazy morning, a slight navigational drift, and missed altitude checks. These factors combined into a fatal sequence that pulled the 40-ton aircraft out of the sky. The impact occurred at 6:53 a.m. The collision released a massive surge of kinetic energy, followed by an immediate electronic silence from the flight deck. Witnesses near the airport described a sharp transition. The roar of the jet engines was replaced by an unnatural quiet that spread across the outskirts of Ahmedabad as the smoke began to rise. The wreckage field spanned several hundred meters. Large sections of the fuselage and heavy engine components were thrown across the fields, leaving a trail of debris through the local geography. The crash killed 133 of the 135 people on board. For the families waiting in the terminal, the technical loss of the aircraft became an immediate, permanent void in their lives. This vacuum on the radar screens translated into a profound emotional crisis for the city. It was the heart-wrenching reality described in the archives, a loss that offered no warning. Local responders and civilians soon converged on the site. They moved through a landscape of smoke and twisted metal, attempting to locate survivors amidst the scattered remains of the aircraft. The damage extended to the property on the ground. The force of the impact was so great that everyday personal items, like this commuter scooter, were reduced to mangled wreckage along the perimeter of the crash site. The recovery process took a massive emotional toll on the workers. Sifting through the debris in such a high-density area required hours of labor, identifying the remains of passengers and the aircraft itself. The sight of heavy aviation components tangled with ordinary objects like scooters served as a reminder of the proximity of the tragedy. A global industry had collided directly with a local neighborhood. This disaster forced immediate changes to safety protocols in Indian aviation. It led to more stringent airport approach measures and the modernization of navigational aids to prevent similar drifting errors in poor visibility. In Ahmedabad, the memory of the crash became a somber historical marker. For those who lived through that morning, October 1988 remains a defining moment that changed the city's relationship with the sky above it. The event highlighted the limits of engineering when confronted with environmental factors like heavy haze and human error. Even a high-performance jetliner was vulnerable to the compounding effects of minor anomalies. Today, the 1988 crash is remembered as the moment time stood still for Ahmedabad. It is a tragedy that left a permanent shadow over the city, and a warning that is still taught to pilots across the country.